Welcome to Dark Speak, where secrets never sleep, and the darkness always has something to say. 4 creepy stories from late-night rides. During a dark time, when the whole world was still immersed in chaotic days, I was forced to turn to a new path to survive. My old job at the supermarket was closed. I became a technology driver, roaming the streets while people were still sleeping. At first, I thought that if I worked hard, the money would come. But the more I ventured into the late nights, the more I realized that there were passengers who did not belong to human side. That night, Nam Phuc City was covered in thick fog. I had just stopped my car in front of a motel on the national highway when the app notified me of a new trip. The pickup point was the parking lot of Tien Quang Shopping Mall, where there was a bowling alley that used to be very busy but had long since closed. The distance was less than a 7-minute drive, so I immediately accepted. The name displayed on the app was Hong Vai. When I arrived, the whole area was only a few yellow lights shining on the cold concrete. There was not a single car around. In the dim light, I saw a man standing still. He wore a dark coat that covered his head, faded pants, tall and thin, his shoulders slightly hunched as if he was carrying an invisible burden. He lowered his head, his hands deep in his pockets, silent as a stone statue. My car stopped. He slowly raised his head. His eyes on the brim of his hat were dark. I couldn't see clearly, only saw a cold reflection like glass. He didn't wave, didn't signal, just quietly approached, opened the door, and sat in the back seat. The destination on my phone was an unfamiliar residential area called In Loc, about 20 minutes away by car through sparsely traveled roads. I confirmed it. He replied in a low, steady voice, without any emotional nuances. He wasn't drunk, nor did he sound tired. It was like a lifeless sound coming from somewhere empty, cold, and dry. The car rolled, the wheels screeching on the wet pavement. For the first 5 minutes, neither of us said another word. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Every time I looked back, he was still sitting upright, his eyes never leaving me, not looking through the window, not looking at the phone, just staring at the back of my neck, cold as needles, unable to bear the silence. I blurted out asking if he was okay, or if I needed to stop somewhere. The gap stretched so long that my heart was pounding. Then his voice rang out, hoarse and slow. Just get out of here. I nodded slightly, asking where. Another silence. Then the answer fell, colder than the darkness surrounding the car. It didn't matter. At that moment, for the first time, I felt like I was carrying someone who no longer belonged to the world of the living. We continued to roll for another 15 minutes or so. As the map on the screen showed a few more house numbers, I began to realize that the destination was in a remote area of Luhai town. There were no more streetlights to illuminate it, only a large yard surrounded by dense trees. The space was pitch black, as if swallowing everything. As we turned onto the dirt road, he suddenly leaned forward, his voice flat. Instead of going to the address written on the app, he pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, not a single light coming from inside or outside. The walls were peeling. The porch was warped. The front lawn was knee-high, overgrown as if no one had taken care of it for years. There was no sign of a car in the driveway. I paused, asking him if he was sure this was where we were going. He simply replied, "Just drive in." Hesitance rose in me, but I still turned the wheel, turning onto the gravel driveway. The car stopped in front of the porch. He didn't come down right away. His eyes were still fixed on the rotten wooden door in front of him. Then he said something softly that made my heart beat faster. "Wait here." He opened the door, stepped out, but instead of heading straight for the main door, he circled around the side of the house, silently disappearing into the pitch blackness. I sat there, frozen, hands still on the wheel. The clock ticked away. 2 minutes passed heavily, a dark premonition screaming in my head that the person had not simply come in to get something. I decided then to trip myself, marking it as done to avoid being charged. Just as I was about to back out, I saw him turn around from the corner of my eye, walking quickly toward the car. His hands were empty, his face strangely distorted, half angry, half excited. I turned on the door lock, tried to appear calm, not wanting to turn the situation into a confrontation. He opened the back door, sat down, and said briefly, "Take me somewhere else." I asked him where he was going. He said, just drive and I'll show you. I refused, saying that I needed to book a ride on the app before I could take him any further. He was silent. His eyes through the mirror seemed to want to drill straight into my mind. No reaction, no words. Just a few seconds later, he softly ordered, "Go back to the place where I was picked up." I didn't want to drag it out any longer, so I turned the car around and headed towards Tien Quang Shopping Mall. The whole way, the space in the car was heavy. An invisible pressure pressed down on my chest. Even though he didn't say anything, I could still clearly feel his gaze piercing the back of my neck. Every hair on my arm stood up. I tried to break the silence with a vague sentence that tonight was really tense. He softly replied, "You can say that." I continued to ask, "Is everything okay?" He replied, "No." Just one short word, but it made my skin cold. I didn't dare to say anything more. When the car returned to the old place, I parked right under the pale yellow light, in the same position as before. Before I could say anything, he suddenly leaned forward, his voice low and ragged. "Have you ever wondered how you would die?" The question made my whole body stiffen. I forced a smile, stammering that I hadn't really thought about it. He didn't smile, just leaned back, breathing softly. A few seconds later, he whispered, "I've always thought about it." After saying that, he opened the door and walked out. The door didn't close right away. He stood halfway, half in and half out, then turned to look at me, his eyes cold as if they were piercing through the glass. His voice rang out, light as a breeze but sharp as a knife. "You picked up the wrong person tonight." The door closed, and he disappeared into the darkness behind the abandoned bowling alley. I sat motionless, shaking so much that my hands could no longer grip the steering wheel. It took me a few minutes to regain my composure and drive home. The whole way, I kept looking at the rearview mirror, afraid that the figure was still sitting behind me. When I got home, I opened the app again to see the details of the trip, but all the data, from name, address, even request history, disappeared as if it had never existed. After that night, I checked the app again and found something unusual. The passenger's name had disappeared. No information was displayed. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was completely blank, as if it had never existed. I contacted the support department to report it, but they only replied that the trip data was unavailable. Maybe the app was faulty or the passenger canceled mid-trip. But I knew what I had experienced. I had driven him. I had heard that cold voice, and I still remembered every word he said before disappearing. "You picked up the wrong person tonight." After that, I never saw him again. But every time I picked up a passenger in the dark parking lot, or when there was a silent person sitting behind the seat, I remembered that night. The feeling was overwhelming that something terrible could have happened. He just changed his mind at the last minute. Or maybe he didn't mean anything, just wanted to strike fear into a stranger's heart. Either way, I wonder who he really was, and if he would ever find the ride he needed. A year later, I was still driving at night. By then, I had moved to Hung Thien City, a popular tourist destination in the summer. For me, driving at night suited my personality, had less traffic, and often got tips from drunk passengers returning from bars. That night was a normal Saturday, around 2 a.m. I had just breathed a sigh of relief after dropping off a rowdy group of students, hoping the next ride would be quieter. The app popped up a new request, the name displayed as Nok Lam. The pickup point was on a small street near the city center. When I drove in, the GPS led me straight into a rather unfamiliar area, not in front of a bar or an apartment, but in the parking lot behind an old shopping mall that had been closed for years. I thought for a moment that the GPS system was off, but I drove on. There, under the flickering streetlight, stood a man alone. He was wearing a black hooded jacket, dark jeans, and he was looking down at his phone. I stopped the car, called the name on the app. He just nodded slightly, then climbed into the back seat, silent. No smell of alcohol, no stuttering. Sober, but silent. He didn't say hello, nor did he answer when I casually asked how the night was. I ignored him, thinking he was probably just a man of few words. The destination was on the other side of the city, about a 25-minute drive, in a suburb called Nduong, which I had only been to once. The problem was that the area was dark, many sections without streetlights, isolated, deserted. After about 5 minutes of driving, I noticed him take out his phone, but didn't call or text. He placed it face down on his lap, turned on the flashlight, and then directed the dim light toward my seat. I turned down, half joking, half seriously, asking if anything was wrong. He grunted softly, yes, then turned off the flashlight and sat still again. For the next 20 minutes, there was only the steady roar of the engine. There were no more words. The space in the car was filled with an indescribable tension. I had the feeling that he was not really there, but just a shadow, a cold void sitting behind me. Finally, we approached the residential area. The GPS led straight into a narrow, quiet street. I slowed down, my heart pounding every second, a feeling that tonight would not be a normal trip. When the car stopped in front of the house, I realized that the place was unusually dark. No porch lights, no light coming from the windows. Everything was immersed in a pitch black. I asked softly, "Is this the destination?" The person sitting behind did not answer. I turned back to look, repeating it again louder. He was still staring out the window, as if he didn't hear anything. I asked again, and finally he nodded slightly. I pulled the car over, saying as usual that I wished him a good night, but he still sat there motionless. I was a little impatient, and asked again if he was okay. Only then did he reach out to open the door, step out, but not close it. He stood right next to the car, the door open facing the dark house in front. I waited silently. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, then half a minute passed. The air was so thick that I almost suffocated. Suddenly, he turned around, leaned down to look at me through the crack of the door, his voice flat. "I need to go back." I was bewildered and asked where to go back. He replied, "Where did you pick me up?" His voice was flat, lifeless, sending a chill down my spine. I told him that I couldn't take him back because it was a half-hour drive and he needed to book a new ride. He shook his head, his eyes staring blankly at me, his voice pleading, "Please, I need to go back." I repeated, "You have to request it through the app." It was then that he let out a sentence that made my blood freeze. "I can't, they're still in there." I froze. I blurted out, "Who's still in there?" But he didn't answer, just stood there, his hands gripping the edge of the door, his breathing quick and heavy. A feeling of suffocation rose in my chest. I tried to stay calm. "Hey, I can't start another trip if you don't book it." He paused for a few more seconds, then slowly backed away, closing the door. Without turning, he walked straight toward the house, silent as if it were dead. I watched until he reached the front steps before driving away. As soon as I turned the corner, I ended the trip on the app, my heart heavy. I drove a few blocks and pulled into an all-night gas station. I took the opportunity to go into the bathroom and buy a bottle of water, which only took about 4 minutes. But when I got back to the car, the sight before me made my heart stop. There he was, still in the back seat, in his dark hooded jacket, his face expressionless. I was sure I had locked the door before entering the store. But there he was, as if he had never left. I opened the driver's door with trembling hands and sat down slowly, eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. The question came out of my mouth. "How did you get in?" His only reply was, "Take me home." I clutched the phone, saying I would call the police. At that moment, he leaned forward, so close that I could hear his rapid breathing. His voice was a whisper. "They're still in that house." I don't know why I didn't call the police right away. There was something in the way he spoke, in the opaque look in his eyes, that made me feel that he was not so much threatening as trapped in a nightmare with no way out. I probed, asking, "Whose house is that?" He replied, "My parents' house." I continued, "Do you still live there?" He paused, then uttered 2 words that made my whole body shiver. "No, anymore." I drove slowly back to the street where I had picked him up. My whole body wanted to scream not to do that, but there was an invisible pressure that made it impossible for me to think of any other choice. The closer I got, the more rapid his breathing became behind me, each rapid sound tearing apart the stuffy atmosphere in the car. He swayed, his hands shaking, whispering incoherent sentences. "They are still in there. They will never leave, no matter what I do." When the car stopped in front of the dark house, the scene was exactly the same as the first time. No lights, no sounds, no signs of life. He stepped out, standing in front of the door as if frozen. He did not knock, did not move, just silently staring into the pitch black. I waited patiently for about half a minute, then turned the car around, making sure all the doors were locked. I drove a few more streets, parked under the pale yellow light, and sat silently for 10 minutes trying to piece together what had just happened. I thought about calling the police several times, but then I hesitated. How would I report it? That a guy had appeared in my car twice and said something incoherent? On paper, there was no crime. I ended up driving straight home, and that night I couldn't close my eyes once. The next morning, I filed a trip report on the app. Honestly, I regretted not calling the police last night. Maybe he was just a psychopath, or maybe he was something else. I just hoped he didn't hurt anyone. Sometimes, I wondered, did that house really belong to his parents, or was it just some shadowy figure in the invisible world? I was a young woman, living alone with my small dog in an apartment about 8 miles out of town. Ordering food was inconvenient at times, but I never thought delivery could be such a terrifying experience. That evening, I had just cleaned my room to prepare for my lover to come over for the weekend. After nearly 2 hours of cleaning, my stomach was rumbling. Not wanting to dirty the dishes I had just scrubbed clean, I ordered food through the app. The message said that the driver in a small white car was on the way. Since I was a girl living alone, I chose the contactless delivery option, asking for the food to be left at the door. A moment later, my phone rang to notify me that the order had arrived. Eagerly, I jumped up and opened the door, but all I saw was an empty hallway. There was no bag there. I thought the driver must have taken the wrong room and was about to text when I heard a knock on the door next door. It was my neighbor. He was holding my bag of food, saying hesitantly, "I'm sorry, I'll help you because I saw the driver staring through your window. I wasn't sure what he was up to." I thanked him and carried the food in, my heart filled with vague unease. After eating, I showered, locked the door, and went to bed. The little dog occasionally growled at the window or the back door, waking me up several times during the night. I hugged it to comfort it, trying to close my eyes and go back to sleep. But less than 15 minutes later, a dry sound made me jump up, a knock on the window pane. Clearly, someone was standing outside. My little dog suddenly became crazy. It barked wildly, growled, and even made heavy whines that I had never heard before. My body stiffened on the bed, unable to move. I pulled the sheet over my head, leaving only my eyes exposed toward the window. At that moment, my trembling hand dialed a police number, whispering in despair. I told the operator that there was a stranger in the backyard, and my bedroom window was not locked and could be pushed open with just a lift of my hand. The woman on the other end of the line told me to move to another room and reassured me that the police were on their way. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and held my breath as I waited for a flash of red and blue lights and the siren to sound. The seconds seemed like centuries. I glanced out the kitchen window, my heart almost stopping. The white car of the food delivery driver was parked right across the street, directly opposite the apartment. That spot was usually an empty lot for dogs to play and for rickshaws to stop, but now it was his place to block it. The car was silent, dark, and there was no one inside. I whispered to myself, "He's in the backyard, right under the bedroom window." Finally, the police arrived. When they entered, my whole body was shaking, and tears were streaming uncontrollably. I tried to explain, while another policeman circled around the back of the house, checking the garden near the window. The third one headed toward the car on the street. A moment later, both of them returned, their faces serious. They told their colleagues that there were fresh footprints on the muddy ground, leading straight to my window. Hearing that, my whole body felt cold. If he wasn't in the car, and he wasn't blocked in the backyard, then where was he? The thought made my head spin. The neighbor came out to check on the situation, and after the police gave me a brief explanation, he reminded me of how he had helped me with the food bag before. He was even kind enough to invite me to his apartment to sleep over, to ease my trauma. However, I didn't know why I refused. When all the police left, the apartment fell into a suffocating silence. I reassured myself that everything was over, and then lay down on the bed. It wasn't until a few hours later that I fell asleep, exhausted. But in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a loud bang on the front door. Outside, the police were calling my name. A wave of fear tore through my consciousness. Impossible, could he be back? I stopped right in front of the door, my heart pounding, not daring to open it. The voice of the woman who had been on the phone earlier rang out, firm but also worried. She said they had been lying in wait nearby in case he returned. And as expected, he did appear, stealthily approaching my door with the intention of breaking in. Thanks to the ambush, they caught him on the spot. Hearing that, I was trembling and choking, tears streaming down my face from shock and relief at the same time. The police officer assured me that he had been subdued and that I would no longer have to worry. I mumbled a thank you, closed the door, but my eyes were still wide open in the darkness. That night, sleep never returned. And since then, I have never dared to order food alone through an app again. At that time, I was 26 years old, a man on a short vacation to visit his fiancée. In this story, I will call her Lon. I came to attend her first training completion ceremony, an important event for the whole family, and she had insisted that I be there. I nodded immediately and booked a flight to that strange city. I planned to arrive a week earlier than Lan's family, so that we could both have some private days before she got busy with relatives and guests. During that time, Lon stayed with me at the hotel. We discussed going out to visit some ancient landmarks around the city. For me, this was an opportunity to see with my own eyes places that I had only seen in books and on the screen. We spent hours wandering through large squares, stopping by memorials, admiring majestic structures that had existed for hundreds of years. It was a strange and fascinating experience, especially for me, who had missed out on field trips when I was in school. Lon seemed very happy to see me interested, and we had some really fun moments together. Afternoon fell. We were both exhausted after the long walk. We decided to return to the hotel to rest. Lon took out her phone to book a car through the app, while I plopped down on a stone bench under the shade of a tree. I clearly remember the feeling of sweat dripping down my back, my legs feeling like lead. Just wanted to lie down on the bed. 10 minutes later, a dark car pulled up, stopping right on the side of the road in front of us. Lon looked at her phone screen and signaled to me, saying that the car had arrived. The location of the car stop was strange. Not a normal parking spot, nor did it look like a place where the driver would randomly stop. But at that moment, neither Lon nor I suspected anything. Lon stepped forward, opened the back door, and leaned down to ask the man in front, "Is this Uber for Lon?" He just nodded, not saying a word. Lon immediately got in. I followed right behind, closing the door, the sound of the door echoing dryly in the quiet space. Thinking back now, I shuddered. We should have checked more carefully. Checked the license plate, asked the driver's name, matched the information. But at that moment, because we were too tired, because we trusted too much in our habit of booking a car through the app, both of us got into a car, without realizing that it could be the beginning of a long nightmare. The car we just got into was a dull silver minivan. The back seat smelled of old leather mixed with an unpleasant musty smell. The man in the driver's seat didn't say a word, nor did he say hello. I found the silence strange, because most of the drivers I had been with would at least confirm their names or ask a few questions. But he was different. He just nodded blankly when Lon asked, then immediately drove as if we didn't exist. I was too tired after a day of walking to want to talk. I leaned my head back on the seat, closed my eyes, and tried to relax. It wasn't until Lon gently squeezed my hand, after a few minutes, that I opened my eyes. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with a panicked look, then held the phone in front of her face. The screen showed the route of the bus, but the road we were on didn't match. He was driving in complete opposite direction. I felt a chill run down my spine as a new notification popped up. The Uber had indeed arrived at the pickup point, with a message from the driver. "Where are you?" My throat went dry. My whole body tensed as I looked back at the screen. The driver's face in the app was nothing like the man sitting in front of us. Lon, and I had foolishly walked into a trap. I glanced toward the driver's seat. He was still mumbling, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, his eyes glued to the dark road. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible, then leaned forward slightly. Actually, we've changed our minds. You can drop us off right here. For the first time since getting into the car, he glanced into the rear-view mirror. His eyes caught mine, staring so deep, so cold that I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. The moment seemed to last forever, but it was probably only about 10 seconds. Then he turned away, continuing to drive, as if he hadn't heard a word. Sweat poured down my forehead. I knew clearly that if I sat still, nothing good would come of it. In a moment of despair, I quietly slid my hand into my pocket and pulled out the pocket knife I always carried. The steel glinted under the flickering light from the street lamp. I gritted my teeth, not beating around the bush anymore. I know you're not the driver we booked. I don't know where you're taking us, but if we don't stop the car right now, I won't hesitate to use this. His eyes immediately looked up at the mirror, meeting the cold blade in my hand. Without a word, he pulled on the brakes. The car screeched to a stop. As soon as the door lock clicked open, Lon and I rushed out, not having time to look back. Just as we stood panting under the yellow street lamp, the minivan revved up and sped off into the night, leaving behind us a suffocating silence. Lon was shaking. Her breathing was rapid, as if she was about to faint. I had to hold her shoulders, constantly reassuring her, so that we wouldn't collapse in the middle of the deserted street. While I was still reeling from what had just happened, Lon shakily opened her phone, quickly texted the real driver of the ride, gave him her current location, and begged him to come immediately. Fortunately, just a few minutes later, another car stopped. This time we carefully checked the license plate, compared the photo and name on the app before daring to get in. The driver was a middle-aged man with a warm voice, and as soon as he heard our story, his face immediately darkened. He sighed, then said that recently there had been many people pretending to be technology drivers in the city. They targeted tourists, strangers who were less suspicious, and often rushed into the car without checking. Many cases of disappearances had been recorded, and the police could only assume the worst. He looked at us in the rear-view mirror, slowly saying that the only reason we were still in one piece was because we had been discovered early, hadn't been taken too far, and probably because I had shown him in time that I wasn't completely helpless. Sitting in the car, I felt a cold air around my neck, as if the shadow of the other person was still lingering behind. When we returned to the hotel, we immediately called the police. I described the situation in as much detail as possible. The figure, the eyes, the type of car, even a scratch on the side door. They listened, nodded, promised to contact me if there was any news. But then there was no call, no letter, no notice, no clue. The other man seemed to evaporate into the darkness, leaving me with a lasting obsession. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Every time I heard the sound of the car engine outside, I imagined him returning, slowly parking right under the hotel window, his eyes lurking like a predator that had not yet been satisfied with its blood. I knew that Lon and I had been too careless. And perhaps it was that carelessness that almost turned us into one of those missing person stories that people only hear about on the news. So if anyone is listening to this story, remember one thing. Never get into a car without being sure it is yours. Verify the name, license plate, face. And always keep your eyes open. Because out there in the dark, there are people waiting for a small mistake to turn you into their next prey. A young man and his fiancée were traveling. After sightseeing, they called a technology car to return to the hotel. The two accidentally got into the car of a person pretending to be a driver. This man did not confirm his identity, quietly driving in the opposite direction. When he discovered the abnormality, the young man was forced to pull out a knife and threaten him, forcing him to drop them off on the street. After that, they were picked up by the real driver and heard that in the area there had been many cases of fake drivers kidnapping tourists. Many victims had disappeared without a trace. Although they were lucky to escape, both were still haunted because the police never found the other person. He could still be out there, hunting for prey. The story ends as a warning. Never be complacent when getting into a ride-hailing vehicle. Always check the driver, license plate, and application information, because just a little carelessness, you may never return. The story ends here. Goodbye and see you in the next video.